Good morning, everyone. We'll give it just a second for folks to trickle in. We do have a packed agenda today with some big things happening at the State House, and we have some really fantastic speakers joining us this morning. So being conscious of the time, I will go ahead and get us started, and then as folks trickle in, they can catch up with us. But I want to welcome each of you and thank you all for being here this morning. Thank you for joining us. This week, the conference committee finalized their deliberations and released their report. And the conference committee report was voted out of the House and Senate. And so now it is heading to Governor DeWine, where he'll be able to review the document and exercise line item veto power at his discretion. And the budget will be signed by June 30th so that it's in place for the new fiscal year starting July 1st. I do want to mention to everybody that this is our last morning meeting of the season. So we started the morning meeting in the fall as a way to keep up with everybody, keep everybody in the loop with what's going on at the State House. And now that things are winding down, we are winding down the morning meeting as well. However, these have been so successful and so well attended that we are planning to bring them back in the fall. So keep your eyes peeled for more information about that. We will be reconvening the morning meeting after a summer recess. So we wanted to give, Troy and myself wanted to give a quick conference committee update before we turn it over to our guest speakers, just to share some high level overview of some of the issues that you've been hearing us talk about the most frequently. First and foremost, we've seen in the conference committee report that the child tax credit remains removed. It was not put back in. We've seen in the Medicaid space that continuous enrollment for eligible children from birth to age 3 has been removed. That law has been removed. In the infant vitality space, specifically looking to community and faith-based infant vitality supports, that the governor had requested $7.5 million to be put toward that community faith-based infant vitality, that has been reduced rather to $5 million per for the investment, so from $7.5 million to $5 million. And then finally, in the home visiting space, Governor DeWine had asked for substantial increases in Help Me Grow home visiting from to $63.5 million in fiscal year 26 and $85.5 million in fiscal year 27. So between the House and Senate changes and conference committee report, we do see a total of $26 million reduction over the biennium there. So that's my quick overview for the maternal and young child health work. I will turn it over to my colleague Troy to speak more to some of the early learning pieces.
Thank you, Caitlin. And jumping right in, as we look at childcare and what you've been hearing from us through our policy agenda and advocacy alerts that we've been sending out, one of the things that the governor proposed in his executive proposal was to move Ohio from 145% of the federal poverty level for initial publicly funded childcare eligibility to 160% of the federal poverty level. That alone would have served 11,000 more children. And that was proposed by the governor. It was taken out by the House and sustained by the Senate. So the budget that was voted off both floors yesterday does not include that change. It's maintained at 145% in the federal poverty level. Just for context, a single mother making $40,000 a year with 2 children in childcare does not qualify for publicly funded childcare. So with, averaging over $20,000 for both children, half of her paycheck goes to childcare alone before any other expenses. Also looking at early intervention, the governor had proposed $16 million, and where we still are seeing a $15 million increase, $14.7 million increase for early intervention over the biennium. We did see a slight reduction in the Senate that was maintained in the conference committee report of over $1.7 million. Imagination Library, the governor had proposed to increase funding each year from $8 million a year to $10 million a year, so a $2 million increase. That was taken out initially by the House, but then put back, an additional $250,000 was put back in, so a slight increase, but still $3.5 million decrease over the biennium that could have been included for Imagination Library. And then, a positive thing that we did see, some positive things we did see is a payment based on enrollment. That's going to be a big impact. So providers are no longer going to be paid based on attendance. They're going to be paid based on enrollment. That will be implemented after this budget. So more money going out to providers. We also saw the science of reading curriculum initiatives that the governor had put in to give access to curriculum and activities that were aligned with the science of reading to early childhood programs and young children in those programs. That was initially taken out, but that has been put back in. Most recently, there's also some changes that we're still analyzing and evaluating, and we'll be reaching out to close stakeholders about our how we interpret that will impact long term. But we saw changes in part-time versus full-time care on the definition of part-time and full-time care for publicly funded childcare from 25 hours for full-time now to 33 hours for full-time. We also saw changes in payment practices for type A and type B childcare programs, and then changes in ratios for family childcare as well. Just want to note this were some last-minute changes. So although we're very disappointed with many of the outcomes that currently stand today, we do just want to express our appreciation and gratitude for all the work that you guys put in. It has been a very busy and active budget season, and we couldn't have done all the work that we've been doing without you guys. Just looking at some of our highlights from the last few months, our Advocacy Day, we had 400 advocates that came to our Advocacy Day at the State House that had over 100 legislative meetings. We had a rally last week for working families. Over 250 attendees came to show up to advocate for working families who need relief. Our morning meetings, we've had 28 meetings since October. So you might be sick of our voices and faces, but we're not sick of you. We really appreciated you being here every week. We had an average of, and you guys came, an average of 74 people on every morning meeting call over those 28 meetings. We also saw an increase in our Family Action Network, and with an increase of 160% enrollment in our families who are involved in our advocacy work. You guys also really showed up to advocate. We had 6 sign-on letters over the course of this budget season with 174 total sign-ons across all 6 letters with 131 unique signatures and organizations. Testimony, we looked at our partner advisory council testimonies. Our advisory council members on our early learning and maternal young child health, we had 78 testimonies over the course of the budget, 112 related testimony from partners who were talking about our issues. And then Groundwork alone did 16 individual testimonies over the course of this budget. We had over 8 advocacy alerts from January to June. So we were in your inbox a lot, and but that also meant that we were in legislators' inboxes a lot. And we had over almost 4,000 submissions over those 8 advocacy alerts from January to June. So again, none of this could have happened without you. We really appreciate you walking through and working and being so diligent about your advocacy. There's also still some opportunities to be able to engage and advocate for children and families. You might have seen Groundwork sent out our press release statement about the budget. It was short and sweet, but really just expressing our disappointment. There still are conversations happening, so we do encourage any organizations. I'll probably be following up with some of you later today. We encourage you to put out a statement, to be vocal about your feelings about where we land with things as conversations are still happening, and the governor signs the budget on June 30th. With that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Caitlin so she can introduce Allison and Lisa.
Thank you, Troy. Yes, it is my absolute privilege to introduce Lisa Dodge and Allison Lawlor. Lisa Dodge is the president with Statehouse Impact Group, and Allison Lawlor is one of their lobbyists. They are truly valued and important source of lobbying support for Groundwork Ohio, and it's really a pleasure to work alongside them and to share this platform with them today to speak more about the budget and what's next. So without further ado, I will turn it over to both of you to share a little bit more about yourselves and kind of where things are right now. Thank you so much, Lisa and Allison.
Sure. Thanks, Caitlin and Troy. So maybe I'll just do a quick introduction myself. Allison can do the same, and then I'll just make some brief remarks about sort of the environment that we're in and where we go from here. And then Allison's going to touch on a little bit of federal activity, and then we'll open to questions if that works. So as Caitlin said, Lisa Dodge, newly named president of Statehouse Impact Group. We were a 20+ year lobbying firm under the prior name of Sean Dunn and Associates. Sean took an opportunity to be a policy advisor for U.S. Senator John Husted. So we sort of recalibrated here, and really the only thing that's changed is we're down Sean Dunn, and we are now Statehouse Impact Group. But all the same folks here and same setup, and fortunately, get to work with Groundwork. My quick bio is 37 years, which is frightening to say, in and around government. I started out in the Ohio Senate many, many, many years ago. I took a brief position with the Ohio Hospital Association where I was there, one of their lobbyists, and then went back into state service, serving as former Governor Taft's legislative director, so basically his lobbyist, for his first term in office, and then went off to the Office of Budget and Management to serve as a deputy director there, president of the controlling board, and then also worked on capital and operating budgets, and then came here 21 years ago to this firm and have sort of been in and around lobbying ever since. So Allison?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Thank you all for letting us be here today to speak with you. Caitlin, Troy, all our Groundwork folks, appreciate the opportunity. Allison Lawlor, I was just looking at a calendar, and it will be 10 years in July that I've been in Columbus, originally from Cincinnati, came up here to work in government, and I've worked in both the House and the Senate as a staffer on the Republican side for, again, about 6 years, and I will have been with Sean Dunn and Associates, formerly, now Statehouse Impact Group, for the last 4-ish years. And so just excited to be here.
So just kind of running through, and some of this will be a little bit of a overlap of what Caitlin and Troy just talked about, but just, kind of starting out, the common messaging that came out, this budget cycle was that we were going to return to a more normal budget. Recent years, after COVID, right, we saw a lot of influx of federal money that was very welcome and provided a boost in many, many areas. And so with this budget, we went back to, again, a more normal budget where the governor's proposed funding was at $108 billion in 26 and $110 billion in 27, which was a 2.9% increase and a 1.9% increase in fiscal year 26 and 27, respectively. When he rolled his budget out in February, obviously families, children, workforce development, economic growth were big focuses of his. Key areas, as we talked about, were in the kid space, were the child tax credit, affordable childcare, and support for children's health and development. In April, right, the bill went on to the House, where they put their stamp on the bill, which included a reduction in spending of $4 billion. The Senate then passed their version in mid-June, which included an additional $2 billion in spending cuts. The House and Senate Conference Committee completed their work yesterday, which is shocking as I was kind of putting my thoughts together on this. They finished at, I think it was around 1:30 or 2 in the morning. I think Allison and I finished our emails around 3 in the morning, and I'm too old. Allison's way younger, so she can manage this kind of stuff, but I'm still paying the price for having a 4-hour sleep cycle 2 nights ago. And, by the weekend, maybe I'll be back into.
Everyone suffers, Lisa. Everyone suffers.
I don't know how the staff does it that works. I mean, regardless of what we think of what came out of the budget, the staff is unreal in terms of the hours and commitment that they put in, weekends, late into the night, early in the morning. So, anyway, so as Caitlin and Troy said, we ended up with a conference committee report around 1:30 in the morning yesterday. We're all still kind of sifting through it. It took quite some time to get the actual documents out, and we're still actually waiting on the budget language. We've seen comp docs, but I don't believe that the budget language itself, the bill, has been released. And if it has, it's been just released. So the floor votes were yesterday. No Democrats supported the bill. I think I heard a statistic that that's the first time in 20 years that there hasn't been a Democrat that voted for the budget. There were a handful of Republicans that voted no. Really, the only one, in my opinion, that voted no for reasons that we would sort of agree with in terms of was Lou Blessing out of Cincinnati area. There were some Republicans in the House that voted no, but they are ones that typically just vote no on every budget, with the exception of Scott Olslager, who was a bit of a surprise to me, given that he was the former finance chair of the House. But anyway, just in terms of where we landed, as these guys said, the $1,000 tax credit for families with kids 6 years and under was removed. Unfortunately, that was a huge priority for the governor. I was a little surprised that we didn't see something come back in conference committee, just because this was sort of his legacy budget. This is his 8th year, or this is his 2nd term and going into his 8th year. And so this will be his last budget. And so we felt like there was a really good chance that there would be some additional discussions. Unfortunately, there were discussions early on about some additional revenue streams, whether it be through sin taxes, gaming, VLTs, iLottery, sports gaming, wagering, and all of those were taken off the table, which unfortunately meant that there were not additional revenues available to fund things like that. Although he had proposed a sin tax as a way to pay for the expanded child tax credit, but they did not go for that. Also, the reduction back to 145% for federal poverty for PFCC. I will say, while they did reduce as I don't remember whether it was Troy or Caitlin that said it. I think Troy, the vouchers, they did reduce the vouchers that were proposed under the governor's budget as 75 million and 150 million. I do like to see silver lining in things. They did invest $100 million in each year of the biennium, which in this very, very tight budget, I think we need to take some positive signs from that there was a commitment to invest $200 million over the biennium for these vouchers. Help Me Grow, the House reduced Help Me Grow by 3 million in fiscal year 26 and 22 million in 27. But I would, again, silver lining, point out that that was a $4 million increase over fiscal year 25 and a $7 million increase in 27 over the 25 level. So again, disappointing, yes, but I think if you talk to a lot of other entities where there were pretty significant cuts made or complete eliminations, particularly in various earmarks, I do think that there is some positive to be taken from that. Same for infant fatality. While the governor proposed funding at 22 million a year, the House and Senate conference report landed at 18 million, but that is a little more than 2 million over the fiscal year 25 level. So there was a slight increase there. I would also note that the House and Senate invested $10 million in fiscal year 26 for the child care cred program, which would help parents. I think it's commonly called TriShare. It helps parents with offset the costs of childcare through a cost sharing plan between employer, employee, and the state. So there again, it's a voluntary program, but it does send a message that the state is recognizing there's a need for employers and employees and the state to perhaps partner, and maybe that will be expanded moving forward. The conferees also restored the kindergarten readiness assessment, which is the tool used to evaluate kids' preparedness for kindergarten. So that's a positive sign. I know there was a lot of disappointment when the KRA came out in the House passed version. I would just sort of, in terms of general takeaways, I would just note that, of course, while this isn't a budget necessarily we wanted, right, we would have much preferred to have gone with what the governor proposed, as opposed to the flat state income tax that was included, which would most immediately affect Ohioans who make more than 6 figures. And will cost $1 billion, as well as the $600 million in unclaimed funds set aside for the Brown Stadium. Again, as I said, there were some sort of silver linings to be taken from some of the additional investments along the way. As we return to a more normal budget, right? I think it was to be expected that we wouldn't see huge growth. I think obviously we would have liked to have seen more. And I just want to say, kind of echoing what Troy and Caitlin said, the progress that we did make, is in large part the result of the folks on this call, and certainly to Groundwork and their efforts, from outreach to legislative decision makers along the way, advocacy days, rallies on the Statehouse lawn, calls to action. People rose up and spoke, and people heard from you. I will say you're making a difference. While it might seem sometimes that you're not, You absolutely are. Alice and I were talking this morning. There is a broader band of legislators that are not only supportive of, but well-versed on what I consider to be a very complex issue, right? Childcare isn't just about one thing. There's all these other, like we just talked about, all these different pressure points and funding lines. And so it's really important that we all stay engaged and continue to sort of be a voice in your communities and in Columbus. Then I would just kind of say one final note, and then I'll kick it over to Allison, is, I do think it's important to say thank you, right? I do think that we have some champions, and I would specifically call out Representative White and Representative Gail Manning, who were both voices, and Gail Manning's the number 2. I think that's a really important thing to note, that she was asked by the Speaker of the House to be his President Pro Tem, and I think that's the right title. Allison will nod, yes, okay. But, the 2 of them were a consistent voice in and around, the caucus conversations. And if not for them, I'm not sure we would have had as much of a sort of voice in the room. And so again, for any of you who, know them, have the time, I do think it's important that while, again, there is some disappointment, there are some silver linings in some of this, and there are some takeaways that we are making progress, and we are advancing sort of the messaging, and they fought hard for those sort of handful of items that we prevailed on. So with that, I will kick it over to Allison, then we're happy to take questions.
Yeah, so 30 seconds. Federal stuff, I will say the disclaimer, Lisa and I do not do federal lobbying. So everything, that I will say, which is fairly brief, take it with a grain of salt. Consult your federal lobbying folks, or consult people who deal with the federal government. That the triple B bill, as I've been calling it, if that gets passed, that will have a significant impact on the states. There are legislators already talking. We've been hearing from them saying, especially around the Medicaid provisions, will they have to address that this fall? Will they have to address that next spring? And so those conversations are already being had, if you will. So could there be an opening back up of some of what has been done in this budget, potentially? My mom always said, don't count the chickens till they start hatching. So I would say, don't start looking at that bill and thinking, well, if this, then that, wait for the chickens to hatch. And then we can, address that. And the legislature will also, every state legislature will address it as it comes down and trickles down to the state. The last very brief thing I wanted to talk about, Lisa, and I was just thinking about it as you were talking, was process going forward. And so now that the legislature has, quote unquote, sent the bill to the governor, there's a bit going on behind the scenes. So as you all prepare to, do more outreach, expressing, I would agree with Lisa, expressing, thank you for continuing to have investments. While they're not what we want, of course, they are still there. I would reiterate what Lisa said, there are a lot of things that did get defunded entirely within this budget. And so as we do that, the LSC is drafting, LSC's Legislative Service Commission. They draft all the bills. They are the saints of Ohio state government, in my opinion. And they're also working with the clerk's offices of both chambers to ensure that the bill is as written. That's why we have not seen it. I did just check, Lisa, the conference committee bill version is not out yet. That likely could not get to the governor until later Saturday night. It does take a while for them to go through 5,000 pages line by line to make sure every single word is correct and every single reference is correct. Be that as it may, like Caitlin said and like Troy said, he has to sign it by June 30th or midnight, exact 11:59, June 30th. And so, the governor's office is, of course, on their side preparing, and they've been doing that the entire conference committee process of if this, then how should we react? That's process questions, or that's the process, if you will, going on. So outreach is still very, very important right now. Sharing that, with his office and expressing those thanks, but also, we still have some challenges to overcome.
Thank you both so much for your thoughts and remarks. There's a couple questions in the chat from Sarah. So I think piggybacking on what you just said, Allison, Sarah is saying, we know these outcomes are deeply disappointing for young children and families, and as advocates, how should we be thinking about this moment, and what should we be looking toward in the months ahead? And in addition to that, how would you encourage us to stay engaged and hopeful? So as you were mentioning, there's still some work to be done before June 30th and beyond. How would you respond to that question?
Lisa, do you want me?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. I'll
Okay.
piggyback if there's.
Yeah. Without hope, what is the point? I guess that's what I would say. If we do not have hope, what is the point of doing what we do? What is the point of getting up in the morning and doing the work, the true on the ground front lines work that you all do, the work that Groundwork does? And so, I wake up every day that I'm hopeful that things will be better. And if they're not, I wake up up the next day and keep going. And so I understand that is very hard and it's very difficult when those in power don't acknowledge and appreciate, partially monetarily through an operating budget, the work that you all do, and the work that Groundwork does. And so, it can be difficult, but without hope, there is no point to anything. And, as you go through the months ahead, I think there's a certain, you circle the wagons, you always, hindsight's always 20/20, and there are always things that we can do better. There are always things that actually, and we want to also, elevate and lift up the things that we did well. Like Lisa said, we have more legislators now that understand the complexities of childcare, and it's no longer just. And I know she said Representative White and Representative, Speaker Pro Tem Manning, those are both women, but we are starting to get more men involved. And, Senator Bill Blessing is a great example of that. It's partially the reason he voted no was because of a lot of the, cuts to childcare issues he has with, income taxes and what have you. And so, just doing that kind of, I don't want to say debrief, but reflection, if you will, and then taking what we did well moving forward, where we could always improve. There are always things we could always change or tweak or things like that.
Let me just piggyback on that real quick too, and just say, not to sound like a broken record, but and I think we can all, for those of us that have kids on the phone, right? We spend so much time telling our kids, say please, say thank you, be polite, respect others. Again, budget didn't land where we wanted it to, right? If we could have just taken the governor's budget and had him sign it back then, we would have been thrilled. But again, there was progress made. There continues to be progress made. I think to answer that question a little bit more too, there's legislation that's still pending. We can continue to advocate on pieces of legislation that are pending. They will not be back in session until fall, thankfully, on the one hand. But come fall, we can regroup and testify and make sure that our voices are being heard. But again, I think that as we continue to gear up for, God help us, in 2 years, right, we'll be right back at this again. But again, taking a moment to appreciate kind of the ground that we did make, the advances that we did make. And it's, in my mind, right, it's a positive to say, thank you for your investments in the voucher, for recognizing the value of Help Me Grow, the value of infant vitality, the value in the tri-share proposal, things like that. However, there is opportunity and a desire to see more. But again, I think sometimes you hear frustration on the legislature's part that they feel like they did something positive, and they didn't cut us, right? And they did invest ever so slightly more. And so I do think it is really important to recognize that and to say to them, thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing us. Thank you for investing. Here are some other areas that we need to see, some additional growth.
Lisa and Allison, thank you so much. These 30 minutes tick by so quickly. I can't believe it's already just after 10, but I want to thank you again. Thank you all for being here as attendees of the morning meetings. Stay tuned for when we will be starting these again in the fall. Thank you for all of your engagement and your participation. And Lisa and Allison, thanks again for being here to debrief us this morning. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you for having us.